Final Fantasy XII, a game that has received near-perfect reviews from critics, including a 9.5 from IGN, a 9.0 from GameSpot, and a rating of A from EGM Magazine. In addition to that, there is a crap load of people who absolutely love this game, and I have no idea why. To properly explain why Final Fantasy XII completely and utterly fails, I must first start out by admitting something. Final Fantasy XII isn't a bad game. It's actually decent as far as games go. I mean, it's pretty to look at, it's technically impressive, and it has a lot of good ideas. I may be harsh at times, but that's only really because I was expecting something excellent, and I didn't get it. I don't even consider 12 to be the worst in the series. That title would go to Final Fantasy VIII, which is so awful that I would commit suicide if I had to analyze it with any depth. The first and most disappointing aspect of Final Fantasy XII is the characters. I suppose if you enjoy the nightly news and its transmission of occurrences in a kind of emotionless vacuum, devoid of any feeling or character, you're going to love this game. Why? Because you have no heart. Final Fantasy XII's story starts out with an introduction that fills in all the backstory. We see the princess, Ashe, getting married to this Lord Rossler of some kingdom somewhere. We see them smiling and they look happy. I start to get a good feeling about all this. Then we see everyone getting all worried about their kingdom getting invaded or something. There's all this anxiety and tension. Apparently Nabadis has fallen. Everyone's upset about this. It's really just too bad the narrator sounds like a newscaster. Anyway, Rossler runs off to war like some kind of idiot. Is it really any surprise that he dies? I mean, one measly arrow does him in for good. What a wimp. So Ashe goes into grieving. In a matter of 5 minutes, we've gone from joy and celebration, to worry and tension, to action and battle, to sorrow and suffering. I'm not for sure what I should feel about all this. Then I see the title screen and realize that this is all just the setup for the real game. We're supposed to assume that the rest of the game is going to outdo everything we've just seen. Instead, this intro sets up a precedence. Everything of consequence in the story either happens off-screen, or is shown at such distance that we feel no involvement in what can laughingly be called the plot. Don't get me wrong, I love political intrigue and everything, and I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy Tactics, but in Tactics we actually cared about what was happening. Final Fantasy XII just tells it to us in some kind of a dull monotone. The kingdom of Dalmasca falls, and we learn that Ashe has died, and that the king of Dalmasca has been slain by a traitor named Bosch. But do we really care? No. We neither see nor feel connections between characters, or even the characters themselves. We're just told about them. This violates every known law of storytelling. The point is to show, not tell. You see, Vaughn's brother Rex was murdered in cold blood by Bosch. You think you would be angry. Instead, we're treated to an awkward and implausible scene where Vaughn is the only character that actually believes Bosch's crap-ass story.
You didn't kill my brother.
Everyone just becomes some kind of static shell in an emotionally sterile universe, where the plot is ruled by events, and the characters are just afterthoughts to everything else. In fact, there's hardly a round character in Final Fantasy XII. They're all flat and uninteresting. What do I mean by flat and round characters? According to E.M. Forrester, flat characters are constructed around a single idea or quality. A flat character fails to realize the complexities and nuances of a real person. They're just part of the scenery and they never really do anything. A round character is the exact opposite. He or she changes over the course of the narrative. Such a character is a creature of action that can make decisions on their own. A round character acts, but a flat character simply is. Let me give some examples so you can see what I mean. When we first meet up with Vaughn, we learn one major element about him. He wants to be a sky pirate.
One of these days, I'll fly an airship of my own. I'll be a sky pirate, free to go where I will.
This aspect of his character is never fleshed out any further and has absolutely nothing to do with any other part of the plot, and really just seems thrown in for no reason. It's almost like the writers knew that the character was a one-dimensional steaming pile of crap, so they decided to give the illusion of depth without ever expending any real effort on the matter. Furthermore, what exactly was his place in the story? He had absolutely no stake in anything that was happening, so the biggest impression he seems to make on us is that he's some sort of effeminate dude with no place in the plot. Next we have Ash. Now you may be thinking she has more going on, what with her husband being killed in battle and all, but her feelings toward that are hardly even mentioned again after the game actually begins. Again, it feels like they knew she was static and uninteresting, so they decided to throw something in but never really do anything with it. In the end, we get two impressions of her. Number one, she kinda looks like a female version of Vaughn, and number two, she really loves her country. Kind of odd when you consider that Dalmasca doesn't even exist anymore. So what's the point of fighting for a country that doesn't exist? Now you may be wondering, why is she fighting for her country? And I'd like to answer that question, but we're never really told. Bosch would seem to be like this guy that was wrongly branded a traitor and stuff, but all I remember about him is that he has no personality at all. Seriously, we never get one single emotion out of this guy. Ever. Even when we learn that he has a brother that looks just like him, he just kinda doesn't really care at all. I'd like to say he's the flattest character ever, but I'm not even for sure he counts as an actual character. More like a barely animate object. Penelo is, well, she's Penelo. I'm not even for sure what that means, but suffice it to say her entire being can be summed up in two words: Vaughn's friend. She has no other purpose, she has no other existence, she has no other place outside of those two words. Period. And unlike the other dull characters, she doesn't even have a role in the plot. Maybe you actually played this game and were like in total denial as to how incredibly awful it was, but subconsciously you were on the verge of suicide without even knowing it. Fran has no character at all, but this seems to be the first time I have ever seen a Final Fantasy game go for the whole Lara Croft sex kitten thing. Even the characters in Final Fantasy X-2 had a little more going on than nothing. She literally has no other purpose in this game but to make men drool over having witnessed the Playboy Bunny physically manifested before their eyes. They're like insulting us with how one-dimensional these characters are. The Final Fantasy games used to mean something. The brand used to be above these kind of shallow attempts at fan service. While every other game resorted to throwing in cheap parlor tricks, Final Fantasy delivered a compelling story that didn't need anything else to keep us interested. Finally, we come to the game's only saving grace, Balthier. No, he doesn't have any character either, but at least he's sort of interesting in his uninterestingness.
I play the leading man. Who else?
What I mean to say is that he's at least colorful and witty in the scenes in which he's present. He has no purpose in the plot other than to provide the player with an airship and to provide Vaughn with a role model and potential lover. In the end, Final Fantasy XII is more about kingdoms than characters. The player always feels disconnected and disinterested, and this makes the game highly impersonal. Final Fantasy XII contains the worst cast of characters since Final Fantasy V. They have no place in the story and never experience any development at all. Now maybe some of you are thinking these comments are all just opinion, and opinions don't really matter much if you don't back them up and substantiate them. Well then get ready. In part 2 I'm going to dig down deep and piece together the fragmented bits and shards that compose the plot of Final Fantasy XII. You'll see all the plot holes, contradictions, and just plain dumbass moments. We're gonna make this ship bleed, and then carefully analyze the remains.